In the heart of the city, high above the crowded streets, stood the glass tower of Gray Enterprises. Everyone in the building knew one thing. Their CEO, Alexander Gray, was not a man to play with. He was strict, sharp, and silent. People feared him, but they also admired him. His name alone carried power. Alexander was only in his early 30s, but he had already built an empire. He was the man who never made mistakes, never showed emotions, and never smiled. In meetings, his cold eyes could silence an entire room. His words were short, but they always cut deep. "Mr. Gray doesn't care about anyone," whispered the employees when he walked past them. "He only cares about work. He doesn't even have a heart." And maybe, in some way, they were right. No one knew his past. No one dared to ask. But there was a reason behind his icy walls. A reason he had buried deep inside. A wound he never allowed anyone to touch again. Once upon a time, long before he was the ruthless CEO, Alexander had loved someone. And that love had destroyed him. From that day, he had promised himself, never again. He believed love was a weakness. Love made people vulnerable. And Alexander Gray was not a man who could afford weakness. His empire stood on discipline, and his heart stood behind locked doors. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. It was a Monday morning when Emma Miller walked into Gray Enterprises for the first time. She was just an intern, 22 years old, with wide eyes and a nervous smile. She came from a small town, carrying dreams bigger than her suitcase. She had heard the stories about the cold CEO. Everyone warned her. Stay out of his way. Do your work, don't ask questions, and never make mistakes. If you cross him, your career is over before it even starts. Emma nodded, but inside, she was different. She wasn't the kind of person who gave up easily. She believed people were more than their reputations, and she believed even the coldest hearts could still feel something. When she entered the office, her heart raced. The building was shining, modern, and filled with busy faces. Everyone seemed to know exactly what they were doing. She, on the other hand, felt like a small fish in a very large ocean. Her first task was simple: deliver some documents to the top floor, the CEO's floor. The elevator ride felt endless. She stood holding the files tightly, her palms sweating. When the doors opened, she stepped into silence. The air was different here, heavy, serious. And at the end of the long hallway was his office. The doors were tall, made of glass, and carried his name in silver letters. Alexander Gray. She knocked, her voice soft. "Yes, sir, the files." "Come in," came the reply, deep, cold, and commanding. She pushed the door and walked in. There he was. Alexander sat behind his desk, his black suit perfect, his face unreadable. His eyes, sharp as ice, lifted from the papers and landed on her. For a second, Emma forgot how to breathe. There was something about his presence, something that froze her in place. "Put them on the table," he said flatly. She did, almost dropping them from her nervous hands. He noticed. His brow lifted slightly. "Are you always this clumsy?" Emma's cheeks burned. "And no, sir, I'll do better." For a moment, silence filled the room. He stared at her, as if searching for something. Then, without another word, he looked back at his papers. "You may go." Emma quickly turned to leave, but as she touched the door, she couldn't help glancing back. He was still there, hidden behind his walls, lost in his work. She didn't know why, but something about him felt lonely. In the days that followed, Emma kept her distance. She worked hard, stayed late, and tried not to make mistakes. But somehow her path kept crossing with his. She would find him watching silently from across the office, or walking past just as she stumbled with her papers. Every time, his expression remained the same: cold, unreadable, almost cruel. But deep in his eyes, for a second, Emma thought she saw something else, something he was trying very hard to hide. And maybe he hated that. Because no matter how strong the walls around his heart were, The small intern with the nervous smile had already found a way to crack them. Alexander Gray had sworn he would never love again. But as fate brought Emma into his world, the question began to rise like a storm in the distance. What happens when a cold heart begins to feel? And for the first time in years, Alexander Gray felt uneasy. Not because of business, not because of failure, but because of her. The next morning at Gray Enterprises was no different. Employees hurried through the hallways, their eyes down, their voices low. The building always carried an air of pressure, and at the center of it stood one man, Alexander Gray. He was already in his office, reviewing reports before the rest of the company had even arrived. Discipline was his religion. Success was his only God. And mistakes were sins he never forgave. Emma Miller, the new intern, was learning this quickly. On her third day, she was given the task of preparing copies of important contracts. It sounded simple, but in Gray Enterprises, even the smallest task carried weight. She worked carefully, her hands steady, her mind focused. But still, when she carried the stack of papers into the meeting room, one sheet slipped and floated to the floor. She bent quickly to grab it, but when she rose, Alexander's eyes were on her. Cold, sharp. "Carelessness is a disease," he said, his voice calm yet heavy. "Do not bring it here." The room went silent. Senior managers looked away, pretending not to notice. Emma's cheeks burned, but she nodded. "Yes, sir. It won't happen again." Alexander didn't answer. He simply returned to the contracts, as if she was invisible. But Emma was not invisible, not to him. Later that evening, Emma stayed late at the office. Most employees had gone home, but she was determined to finish the tasks she had been given. Her small desk lamp glowed softly against the quiet night. From his office, Alexander noticed her. At first, he ignored it. "She's an intern. Not my concern." But something about her persistence caught his eye. She was tired, her shoulders slouched. Yet she didn't quit. When another employee rudely dropped extra work on her desk and walked away without thanks, Emma smiled faintly and said, "I'll handle it." Alexander frowned. He couldn't understand it. Why would someone accept extra work without complaint? Why would someone smile when others were unkind? It irritated him. It confused him. And somewhere deep inside, it pulled at a part of him he thought was long dead. The next day, the office was buzzing. A mistake had been found in one of the reports. Everyone feared Alexander's reaction. His reputation was ruthless. One mistake could cost someone their job. Emma, however, discovered something unusual. While reviewing files, she realized the error wasn't her colleague's fault. It was caused by outdated information. Quietly, she corrected it and brought it directly to Alexander's office. He looked at her, surprised. "You?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I checked everything. The numbers didn't match, so I updated the data." She handed him the corrected file. He studied her face, then the papers. The numbers were perfect. He leaned back in his chair, silent for a moment. "Why did you do this?" Emma hesitated. "Because it was the right thing to do." For a second, Alexander almost smiled. Almost. But then, just as quickly, his walls returned. "Don't expect gratitude," he said flatly. "This is what you are paid for." Emma nodded. "Of course, sir." She turned to leave, but deep down, she felt she had seen something flicker in his eyes, something human, something fragile. By the end of the week, whispers filled the office. Why does Mr. Gray keep noticing the intern? He never pays attention to anyone, but with her, it's different. Do you think she's in trouble? Or something else? Emma didn't know about the rumors. She only knew that working under Alexander Gray was both terrifying and strangely challenging. He pushed her limits, tested her patience, and yet she wanted to prove herself, not just for the job, but for reasons she couldn't explain. And Alexander, he told himself he didn't care. He told himself she was nothing more than an intern. But late at night, when he looked out of his office window at the city lights, her face kept appearing in his mind. The way she smiled despite the pressure. The way she worked quietly, but with strength. It unsettled him. He hated it. Because the last time he had allowed someone into his heart, they had shattered him. He would not make that mistake again. One evening, as Emma left the building, the rain poured heavily. She stood outside, shivering without an umbrella. Cars rushed past, splashing water on the road. Alexander's black car stopped in front of her. The tinted window rolled down, and there he was, staring at her with those unreadable eyes. "Get in," he said simply. Emma froze. I can walk. It's fine. Do not argue." His voice was calm, but firm. She obeyed, sliding into the leather seat. The car was warm, quiet, and filled with his presence. She sat nervously, hands in her lap. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Alexander finally said, "You will catch a cold if you walk like that. Be smarter." The days at Gray Enterprises continued with the same rhythm. Meetings, reports, deadlines. For the employees, it was all routine. But for Emma, every day felt like a test. Working under Alexander Gray was like walking on thin ice, one wrong step, and everything could break. Yet slowly, something strange began to happen. The more she worked around him, the more she noticed small cracks in his icy armor. One afternoon, during a tense meeting, Emma sat quietly at the corner of the table, taking notes. The managers argued over numbers, each one afraid to disappoint the CEO. The air was heavy with fear. Finally, Alexander slammed the file shut. "Enough. If none of you can solve this, then why are you here?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. Everyone lowered their eyes. Emma hesitated. Her heart raced, but she raised her hand slightly. Sir, I think the figures could work if the budget is shifted to the marketing side." All heads turned toward her. A pin-drop silence followed. No one had ever dared to interrupt Alexander Gray, let alone an intern. He narrowed his eyes at her. "Explain." Her voice shook, but she continued. "If we reduce the extra spending on logistics and add that amount to marketing, the growth rate will balance. It's simple, really." She slid her notes across the table. Alexander studied them. For a long, tense moment, no one breathed. Then, finally, he leaned back in his chair. "Interesting," he said quietly. "The intern sees what the managers cannot." A faint smirk almost appeared on his lips, though he quickly hid it. The managers shifted uncomfortably, embarrassed. Emma lowered her gaze, cheeks burning, unsure if she had made a mistake or a victory. But in Alexander's mind, something clicked. This girl wasn't just another face in the office. She had courage. And courage was something he respected, though he would never admit it. By the end of the week, whispers in the office grew louder. "Did you see how Mr. Gray listened to her? He never lets anyone speak like that. She's just an intern. Why does he even care?" Emma tried to ignore the gossip, but it wasn't easy. Every time she walked past, people stared. She told herself it didn't matter. She was here to learn, not to impress anyone, especially not the cold CEO. Still, late at night, when she thought about the way he had looked at her, her heart beat faster. One rainy evening, Emma stayed back to finish a task. The office was nearly empty. She sat at her desk, rubbing her tired eyes. Suddenly, the power flickered and went out. The building fell into silence, the only light coming from the storm outside. She froze. Alone in the dark, her chest tightened with fear. Then, a faint glow appeared down the hallway. A flashlight. And with it, the sound of footsteps. "Still here?" a familiar voice asked. It was Alexander. Emma exhaled with relief. "Yes, I was just finishing." He stepped closer, the beam of light falling on her face. For a moment, he just looked at her. She seemed fragile, almost lost in the dark. Yet her eyes still carried that spark. "You shouldn't stay this late," he said. "Not in a storm like this." She smiled nervously. "I guess I lost track of time." For the first time, his voice softened. "Be careful." The words were simple, but they startled her. They didn't sound like an order. They sounded human. And in that small moment, she saw it, the crack in his ice. The next day, she arrived early. Passing by his office, she noticed the door slightly open. Curiosity pulled her closer. Inside, Alexander stood by his desk, holding a framed photo. She caught only a glimpse, a woman smiling, standing beside a younger version of him. His expression was unreadable, but there was pain in his eyes. Emma quickly stepped back before he noticed. But in her heart, questions began to grow. Who was she? Why did the memory hurt him so much? Alexander, sensing her presence near the door, placed the photo face down and straightened his posture. When he looked up, his mask was back in place. Cold, strong, untouchable. "Do you need something?" he asked sharply. Emma shook her head. "No, sir. Sorry." She walked away quickly, but the image stayed with her. She now knew there was a story hidden behind his walls, a wound he refused to show. That evening, as she packed her things, Alexander called out from his office. "Emma." She turned, surprised. "Yes, sir." He studied her for a long moment. His voice was calm, almost hesitant. "Do not let anyone in this company make you feel small. You are not." Emma blinked, unsure what to say. His words carried weight, heavier than anything he had said before. She nodded slowly. "Thank you, sir." Gray Enterprises buzzed with its usual intensity. Phones rang, keyboards clicked, and footsteps echoed in the hallways. To most employees, it was just another busy week. But for Emma, every passing day felt heavier. Ever since she had seen that framed photo in Alexander's office, questions filled her mind. Who was that woman? Why did his eyes hold so much pain when he looked at her? She wanted to ask, but she knew she couldn't. Crossing that line could cost her everything. Yet, the secret sat in her heart like a heavy stone. That afternoon, Emma was tasked with delivering files directly to Alexander's office. She knocked gently before stepping in. He sat at his desk, his posture sharp as always, but his face looked tired. His hand rested near the photo, now turned face down. He quickly slid it aside as she walked in. "Your report," she said softly, placing the papers before him. He nodded, but his eyes studied her. "You seem distracted, Miss Miller." Emma froze. "Me? No, sir." He leaned back in his chair. "You're lying." "Don't." Her lips parted, but no words came. How could he see through her so easily? She lowered her gaze, gripping the folder tightly. For a long silence, Alexander said nothing. Then, just as suddenly, he waved his hand. "That will be all." Emma left quickly, her heart pounding. But she knew now that he had noticed her unease. Later that evening, as Emma packed up to leave, she overheard two employees gossiping near the break room. "Did you hear about Mr. Gray's past?" one whispered. "They say he was engaged once, to a woman who betrayed him. No wonder he turned so cold. Imagine giving your heart, only to have it broken." Emma's breath caught. She moved away quietly, her thoughts spinning. Could that woman in the photo be the one? The puzzle pieces began to fit, but the picture was still incomplete. The next day, fate brought an unexpected moment. Emma was carrying files through the hallway when she slipped, the papers scattering across the floor. As she hurried to pick them up, one page slid under the half-open door of Alexander's office. Embarrassed, she knocked quickly and entered to retrieve it. But as she bent to grab the paper, her eyes fell on his desk. There it was again, the same photo. This time, it wasn't hidden. The woman's smile seemed warm, full of light. And next to her stood Alexander, younger, happier, almost unrecognizable. Emma froze, the paper still in her hand. She hadn't meant to look, but she couldn't stop herself. Then his voice cut through the air. "See something interesting, Miss Miller." Her heart jumped. She turned to find him standing at the door, watching her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes carried warning. I'm sorry," she stammered. "I wasn't." "Curiosity," he interrupted coldly. "A dangerous habit." She swallowed hard, guilt filling her chest. "I didn't mean to intrude, sir." For a long moment he said nothing. His gaze lingered on her, sharp yet conflicted. Finally, he walked past her, picking up the photo and placing it face down once more. "You will forget what you saw," he said quietly. Emma nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Of course. But inside, she couldn't forget. That night, Emma sat in her small apartment, staring at the city lights outside her window. She replayed his words in her mind, the loneliness in his eyes, the way he protected the photo like a secret he could never share. She promised herself she wouldn't tell anyone. Not about the photo. Not about what she overheard. This was his pain, his story. And somehow, she felt it wasn't her place to expose it. But the truth was clear. Alexander Gray wasn't just cold. He was broken. The following morning, Alexander surprised her. As Emma worked at her desk, he stopped beside her. The entire office froze, shocked to see the CEO standing so close to an intern. "You corrected the logistics report last week," he said. "Good work." Emma blinked. Praise. From Alexander Gray, it felt impossible. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. For a moment, their eyes met, and in that brief silence, a silent trust formed. He knew she had seen pieces of his hidden world, yet she hadn't spoken a word. And Emma realized something too. He didn't want to be seen, but part of him needed someone who could. But against his will, his mind wandered to Emma. Her courage, her kindness, the way she looked at him, not with fear, but with understanding. For the first time in years, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, someone could hold his secret without using it against him. Still, he pushed the thought away. Feelings were dangerous. Trust was dangerous. And Alexander Gray couldn't afford danger. But as much as he tried to deny it, the walls around his heart were no longer unshakable. Emma had seen behind them. The air inside Gray Enterprises was tense. Everyone walked faster, spoke softer, and kept their eyes down. Rumors had been spreading for days, growing like wildfire through the hallways. The whispers were always the same. Why does Mr. Gray notice her? He never looks at anyone, but with the intern, it's different. Maybe she's in trouble, or maybe something else. Emma heard the whispers too, though she pretended not to. Every time she walked through the office, she felt the eyes on her back. But she refused to let them break her. She had worked too hard, fought too long to let gossip decide her worth. Still, a small part of her wondered, what if they're right? What if he does notice me differently? That Friday, the tension finally exploded. Emma was walking through the lobby, carrying a stack of files, when she was stopped by Mr. Blake, one of the senior managers. His smirk carried poison. "So," he said loudly, making sure others could hear, "the little intern thinks she's special now. Is that why the CEO keeps defending your mistakes?" Emma's face burned. "I don't think I'm special. I just work." "Work?" Blake laughed cruelly. "You're nothing more than an intern. You don't belong here. Don't think Mr. Gray's attention means anything. People like you are easy to replace." Laughter echoed from a few others standing nearby. Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but the words stuck. And then, a deep voice cut through the noise. "Enough." The entire lobby fell silent. Alexander Gray stood at the top of the stairs, his eyes cold as steel. Every step he took down the marble staircase echoed like thunder. When he reached the floor, he stopped directly in front of Blake. "She belongs here," Alexander said firmly, his voice low but heavy with power. "And if anyone here questions that again, they will answer to me." Gasps spread through the crowd. No one had ever seen him defend anyone like this. Blake's face turned pale. "Ah, yes, sir." He lowered his head, his arrogance collapsing. Alexander's gaze swept over the room. "Get back to work." Within seconds, the lobby emptied, leaving only Emma standing frozen, her heart racing. She whispered softly, "You didn't have to do that." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Yes, I did." For a moment, silence wrapped around them. His eyes held hers longer than they should have, and Emma felt her breath catch. Then, without another word, Alexander walked away. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed the moment over and over. The way he had spoken, the way he had stood up for her. It wasn't just protection. It felt like something more. But with that warmth came fear, because if he cared, what did it mean for her? What did it mean for him? Meanwhile, in his penthouse high above the city, Alexander sat by the window, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. His reflection stared back at him, the cold CEO, the man who had sworn never to feel again. Yet all he could think about was Emma, her strength, her kindness, the way her eyes shone even when the world tried to dim them. He hated it. He hated how much she disturbed his carefully built silence. He hated how her smile stayed with him long after she was gone. Most of all, he hated the truth he could no longer deny. He was beginning to care, and caring was dangerous. The following Monday, Emma made a decision. She had seen enough. The gossip, the stares, the whispers, it was too much. She wasn't sure what was happening between her and Alexander, but she knew one thing: it couldn't end well. So, after finishing her work, she quietly placed a resignation letter on her desk. Her hands trembled as she signed it. She whispered to herself, "It's better this way, before things get too complicated." But fate had its own plans. As she walked out of the office carrying her bag, Alexander appeared in the hallway. His eyes immediately fell on the letter in her hand. "What is that?" he demanded. Emma froze. "It's my resignation." The silence between them was heavy. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched. For a moment, his mask slipped, and Emma saw something raw in his eyes. Fear. "No," he said firmly. "You're not leaving." She swallowed hard. "Mr. Gray, this isn't right. The rumors, the pressure, it's too much. And you." She stopped, unable to finish. "And me," he pressed. Her voice cracked. "You don't want me here. Not really. You don't let anyone close." His breath caught, but he said nothing. His silence was louder than words. Finally, Emma shook her head. "I can't stay in a place where I feel like a mistake waiting to happen." She stepped past him, leaving the letter in his hand. The night after Emma handed in her resignation, Gray Enterprises felt different. The office lights glowed as usual, phones rang, papers shuffled. But for Alexander Gray, the world had gone silent. He sat in his office, staring at the letter on his desk. Her handwriting was neat, the words polite, but he could read between the lines. She wasn't leaving because of failure. She was leaving because of him. For years, Alexander had lived behind walls, believing love was a weakness. He had promised himself he would never let anyone close again. But now, watching Emma slip through his fingers, he realized something he had never admitted before. Those walls weren't protecting him. They were destroying him. The next morning, Emma walked through the lobby for the last time. Her bag hung heavy on her shoulder, her heart even heavier. She avoided eye contact with the employees around her. She didn't want to face their whispers anymore. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped inside. Pressing the button for the ground floor, the metal doors began to close. But just before they shut, a hand stopped them. The doors slid open again, and there he was, Alexander Gray. Her breath caught. "Mr. Gray." "Don't," he said quietly, stepping inside. The doors closed behind him, trapping them in a small, silent space. Emma gripped her bag tighter. I told you. I can't stay here. He turned toward her, his jaw tight, his eyes stormy. And I told you, you're not leaving. Her heart pounded. You don't mean that. You don't let anyone close, Alexander. You never have. His name on her lips shook him more than he wanted to admit. For a long moment he said nothing. The elevator hummed as it carried them down. Then, finally, his voice broke the silence. You're right, he said. I don't let people close. Because once I did, and it destroyed me. Emma's chest tightened. She stayed quiet, afraid to breathe. His eyes locked onto hers, raw with truth. I told myself love was a weakness, that it made me blind, vulnerable. But then, you walked in. Her lips parted. Alexander, you changed everything, he continued, his voice low but trembling. I can't stop thinking about you. I can't ignore you. And I can't lose you. The elevator stopped at the ground floor, but neither of them moved. The doors opened, revealing the busy lobby, but Alexander pressed the button to keep them closed. For the first time, the powerful CEO looked afraid. Stay, he whispered. Not for the job, not for the company. Stay, for me. Emma's eyes burned with tears. Do you even hear yourself? You built your life on walls, on silence. How do I know you won't shut me out the moment I step too close? His voice cracked. Because you already broke through, and I don't know how to live without that anymore. Silence filled the elevator. Emma searched his face, looking for a lie, but found only truth. Painful, messy, real. Her heart wanted to believe him, but her mind whispered warnings. Was it worth the risk? Could she heal a man who had sworn never to love again? Finally, she spoke softly. If I stay, I need to know one thing. His chest rose sharply. What? Are you ready to love again? The question hung in the air like lightning. Alexander's breath shook. For years, he had buried the word love under layers of ice. But now, standing before her, he felt the weight of it more than ever. Yes, he whispered, his voice raw. Yes, I am. Emma's tears slipped free, but a small smile followed. Slowly, she set her bag on the floor. The walls around Alexander's heart shattered completely. Later that evening, the two of them stood on the rooftop of the building. The city lights stretched endlessly below, the wind carrying the chill of night. Alexander looked at her, his eyes softer than they had ever been. I can't promise I'll be perfect, he admitted. I've made mistakes. I've pushed people away. But with you, I want to try again. Emma stepped closer, her voice gentle. That's all I need. Not perfection. Just truth. For the first time in years, Alexander smiled, not the cold smirk of a CEO, but the fragile, genuine smile of a man who had found something worth fighting for. And in that moment, the cold CEO who swore he'd never love again finally surrendered to the warmth he thought he had lost forever. The world below moved on. Meetings, deadlines, whispers, rumors. But up on that rooftop, two hearts stood against the weight of the past, ready to take a risk together. Love hadn't destroyed him. Love had saved him. And though the future was uncertain, one truth remained. Alexander Gray had found the heart he couldn't protect, and he never wanted to.